Our theme today is city and country. And these are two artists who pretty much centered their careers around those locales. Realist painters, by the nature of what they do, are of course rooted in their physical environment. And so it matters where they live. Someone like me who works off of fantasy doesn't really matter where I live. My interior life is sometimes affected by my environment, but certainly not always and usually not very directly. Okay, well let's get started here with Richard Estes. He takes photographs, walks around New York City with an electric camera, a digital camera, and he's constantly photographing the city. And it's from those images that he creates his paintings. He's an extraordinarily gifted painter. People who think that somehow art skills have degenerated since the advent of abstraction will be surprised to see both of the painters we'll look at today are among the most realistically skilled artists who have ever lived. Both of them are artists who work in reaction to the physical environment they're in. All of us artists are environmentally sensitive. And both of them became realists when abstraction became the kind of high fashion of the modern art world. Most of you have heard about Jackson Pollock, and many of you have probably saw photographs of him on the cover of Time magazine. Well, artists are not, given the nature of who they are, creative personalities don't ever walk in neat rows. And artists are around the map in terms of the various things that interest them. And in reaction to that kind of cultural dominance of abstraction, you get realists rising to the surface. And so today we're looking at the work of these realists. What I find curious, and in fact I was looking very carefully at this video last night. He takes these photographs, then he makes paintings that are just meticulously accurate. And I figured maybe he's enlarged those photographs on a computer screen or something like that, and that's what he's looking at while he's painting. I never saw a computer, I never saw a photograph. He draws the subject out ahead of time. I saw faint pencil lines. And the other thing he does is he paints very roughly at the beginning, just loose, broad strokes to organize his composition. And then as he keeps painting, the painting gets tighter and tighter and tighter. Now, the thing you want to be aware of, and you'll notice this in some of these paintings, most of us imagine there is no way of presenting reality any better than photographs. Nothing more accurate than that. In fact, painting can be more accurate than photographs. In the sense, if you take a small image, that image has a certain grain structure and so on, and it can only show so much. You take that image and magnify it to 3 or 4 feet, which is often the scale he works at, you in fact include more visual information that is in the photograph. So you will see a kind of vividness to these images that almost seems beyond photographic. As I say, you will mix them up. There's no accident that is called photorealism. Let's take a look at the first image. His subject is New York City. It's a kind of sanitized New York. You don't see garbage, you don't see gray snow, you don't see litter. What you see is a kind of glistening, contemporary, technological world. He loves reflections. People enter in the photographs almost secondarily. He's not a portrait artist, although of course he's quite capable of doing that. If you look carefully at this image, you see a few people in those phone booths. But of course, they're just only there incidentally. The reflections are as kind of what the painting's about. You notice you say to yourself, and by the way, always pick subjects like this that are not famous. They're just everyday subjects. You want to say to yourself, why is he doing this? Why does he spend hours and hours and hours doing these incredibly exacting images? And I'm not sure he knows. One of the telling quotes that I heard him say when he was being interviewed in this video. Now, keep your jaws closed when you hear this. The guy says, "I try not to think about the subject matter when I'm making my paintings." Now, go figure. The paintings he's shaped, he was educated at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is a very contemporary, very fine art school. I knew a couple of professors there at the university. He's shaped by the abstract movement. And strangely enough, he's taking realism and making it formal, abstract. In other words, with emphasis not on sentiment, but on composition, on color. For people who are not trained in composition, it's not always easy to relate to these paintings. I'll give you an example. I was a dean of a school of music for many, many years. And I'm not a trained musician. I have no special music ability. I never have been able to get cool jazz because I don't have the appropriate musical gifts, and I'm not trained to get it. Now, I don't degrade it or deny its value because I don't get it. The problem is with me, not with the art form. But I like a melodic line in music, and jazz rarely has much of a melodic line. If you have to scrabble around to see if you can find it somewhere in the midst of the composition. Anyway, now this is actually one of his largest paintings. It's almost life-size. And you can get a sense of his whole style from this painting. You're saying oil? No, they're not in oil. The video didn't say what they were, and on the computer they're generally not listed. But based on my observation of his working method, I think they're done in acrylic, because he quickly does layer on top of layer. And acrylic dries very quickly, so you can lay it. Oil, some colors take months to dry. The darker colors that are fat with linseed oil can take up to 8-10 months to fully dry. So I assume it's acrylic paint. Can we see the next one, please? This is a typical format that he uses in many of his paintings. An inside-outside view. He likes somehow that mixture. You see the people are simply urban New York residents. You've got people in the bus or rail car or whatever it is, and people outside. And incredible amount of information in a photograph like this. He, of course, where you might ask yourself, where does the creative act enter? How does this go beyond just mere craft, just exacting repetition of something? It's in the photograph itself. He's walking around New York with his camera around his neck, and he's seeing things that interest him. And he's taking an image, sometimes several images, and then goes back to the studio. And he says he sometimes does editorial work on the image. He will delete certain things and include other things. In this particular painting, he does something that he normally doesn't do. Most people look at an Estes painting and consider it a kind of visual puzzle because he buries his signature somewhere in this complex urban scene. Generally, he does not put it down in the lower right-hand corner like most artists do. But in fact, if you look closely down here, we see something. I don't know if that's electronically added or if that's his actual signature or not. Can we see the next one, please? He loves these dramatic perspectives. The paintings, the whole sort of formal organization of the paintings have all these diagonals in them. And the diagonal line, by the way, is a line of a direction of instability. When things are moving, they're diagonal. When they're vertical, they're still. When they're horizontal, they're still. So his paintings are full of diagonal lines to capture the sort of dynamic energy of an urban environment. But he picks these very prosaic, ordinary scenes that no one really would normally be paying attention to. And in this particular case, you get these two perspective lines coming together kind of at the head of the viewer. So you get a really dramatic spatial sense here.
So much detail.
I'm sorry, what?
So much detail.
Yeah. He loves that. His painting easel, he doesn't use what our artists call a maul stick, a stick they lean against the painting, and so that they don't put their hands on wet painting while they're painting. He has a very fancy easel, great big easel, probably cost thousands of dollars. It was custom designed by him. And it has a rail that slides across the top. And he just moves that rail along, and that's what he puts his wrist on when he's painting. And he's painting with brushes that are rarely more with bristles, more than half an inch long. Can we see the next one, please? This is an exceptional painting by him because he doesn't do famous buildings. This, of course, is Franklin Lloyd Wright's Guggenheim Museum. It doesn't look like this anymore. They've added a new wing behind it. It's just a simple block-like form behind it. But any case, again, the question is, is it, why would you spend hours and hours doing something like this without sort of revealing parts of your personality in it? I'll mention a fact that might help you unravel that question. He's openly gay. He moved to New York City because of the lifestyle of New York City. And I suspect he has a suspicion about revealing who he is fully. That's just a theory. Can we see the next one? Here you go with one of these inside-outside views again. And by the way, most of these paintings, we couldn't get the measurements, a lot of these paintings, but most of them are just conventional size. The size you see on the screen is probably pretty close to the actual size of that painting. He often includes water in his paintings. In this case, you're probably looking at the East River, and notice it had a kind of pasty gray-green look about it, and almost no sign of waves. But other paintings have very vigorous visions of the water. Again, you see, even though you get this vertical rhythm in this painting, you still get these dramatic diagonals. Look at that one girder that goes up to support the roof there. These are not paintings you warm up to. These are paintings you admire. And as an artist, paintings I respect because I understand the gifts that are displayed in this work and how difficult it is to bring something off like this. He says the biggest problem he has is getting the values right. Now, most of you are probably not quite sure what that word value means. In the visual arts, it's a technical term. It means darkness and lightness. Some colors are naturally dark, like purple. Some colors are naturally light, like yellow. Getting the overall value right of a painting, because remember these things are mostly done in daylight, is, he said, is the hardest thing, not getting the colors right, but getting the overall value of the painting, so it feels like it did when he was on that location. If he gets it wrong, he does the painting all over again. Extraordinary level of dedication and craft. Can we have the next one, please? The city can be a beautiful place. I taught in Chicago for more than 40 years. And the city is not a place that frightens me. And there are tremendous advantages of being in a city. However, my wife does not quite agree with me on that subject, so normally we have not lived in cities. But this particular painting, notice the softness of the color. Again, you get this dramatic diagonal perspective. But you get these soft blues and these pink colors. I just find it to be just a sweet-looking painting. You may not consider that to be sweet-looking, but I do. I know how much work it took to make that thing. Now, I think that's our last one of Richard Estes. Now we're going to talk about an artist many of you probably know a little bit about. He was part of the culture wars during the 1950s when Jackson Pollock was on the cover of Life magazine, because Life magazine also had an article about Andrew Wyeth. And their styles could not be different. And so conservative elements in our society sort of lined up behind Wyeth and his way of working. More liberal elements in our society lined up around Pollock. The irony of it is that I don't think the artists had any problem with each other. I think they both admired each other's work. Wyeth, of course, is a realist, but he always talked about his work. He said, "I'm an abstractionist." And most people couldn't figure out what he meant by that. And as we start looking at his work, we're going to talk about that. You'll notice in this introductory sentence, I have the phrase dramatic compositions. That's where his love of abstract form and composition shows up in his work. The first one is probably one you've already seen. It's an image that has almost become a cultural icon. Wyeth, of course, he paints in two different locations, Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania, and Maine. Christina was a woman who had a birth defect and was never able to walk. And he created this painting of her and her home. And by the way, the technique he works with is a technique that many of you are not familiar with. It's an ancient, actually a medieval painting technique. It's called egg tempera. Basically what it is you take egg yolk, you mix dry pigment with egg yolk. You can thin that down, of course, with water. Egg yolk actually can become a wonderful glue. And so the yolk becomes the carrier. In other words, that's what makes the paint liquid. And the binder, what holds the paint to the support is the surface you're painting on. Egg tempera is sometimes done on canvas, but more commonly done on a harder surface. The medieval painters generally worked on wood boards. Modern tempera painters actually commonly work on plywood because they don't have to worry about glue joints or anything like that separating over time, or a material called masonite. Some of the men in the room know what masonite is, but not many of the women probably. But in any case, it's a hard surface, and then the paint, of course, dries quickly. And so you use very small brushes, and if you're creating tone, because it's drying quickly, it's hard to create tone. So these particular modern tempera painters have learned something from their forebears who were Impressionists. They learned that you can mix color in the eye as much as you can mix it on a palette. If I put a lot of yellow dots next to a lot of blue dots and walk back far enough, you'll see green. That's what tempera painters do to create tonal gradation in their painting. They do very, very small stippled brushstrokes. As I say, I have a good friend who's actually pretty well-known tempera painter. He has a painting in the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. And this is the way Tim works. Any case, you'll notice several things about this work. First of all, you'll notice it's not a very bright coloration on the work. It's, the grass is not green. It looks like a dry, desiccated kind of field. And then you see the home and the barn sort of silhouetted against a kind of grayish, not a bright blue sky. Christina is wearing a pink dress, but it's light pink. It's got a lot of gray in it. And you can get a sense that Wyeth, just the reverse of Estes, cares a lot about his subject matter. He's thinking about the subject matter the whole time he's painting it. And the premise here behind this work is that space between that house in the background and Christina in the foreground. And you'll notice her body and the direction in which she's looking suggests her attention at the house. And you sense that space between the two. And it creates a sense of a kind of isolation, a kind of loneliness. And that'll be a characteristic tone throughout much of Wyeth's work. By the way, his father was a relatively famous artist. He was a illustrator, and Wyeth was rather sickly as a young person, so he was homeschooled in Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. And his father taught him how to paint. And so, in fact, in his teen years, he sometimes actually did commissions that his father was doing to illustrate books and magazines under his father's name, but in fact, he had actually done them. But anyway, notice this kind of rather dull coloring and really dramatic positioning of subject matter in the composition. This is kind of what he means when he calls himself an abstract artist. He's telling a story through shape and color. The dry color indicates a darker, more reflective, interior, emotional tone to the work. Can we see?
Reminds me of Emily Dickinson's poetry.
That's right. You know, that whole family were, Emily Dickinson, of course, would be an American poet. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, they were people that the Wyeth family really admired. You know, they are sort of quintessentially a kind of fairly elite, but a fundamentally American family. That's how people started to take paintings like this, put it next to a Pollock painting, and basically say, you know, pick one, and you can't like both of them. Can we see the next one, please? Here's a painting by his father, N.C. Wyeth. It's called The Lobsterman. It's an illustration. I'm not sure what particular book that it's illustrating, but any of you have seen the paintings of Winslow Homer, who was an American artist who painted on the coast of Maine. That's where the Wyeth family had a place, I might add, on the coast of Maine. They had a place in Maine, and then they had a place in Pennsylvania. Both of them, of course, rural locations. And anyway, you can see that Wyeth inherited some of the gifts from his father, but his father is really more of a generalized kind of painter. He doesn't bring the level of detail to his work that you see in Andrew's work. Can we see the next one, please? You've heard me talk about his work as poetic, and of course Dickinson was a poet. You can get a sense of that here. This particular work, he says, he was actually he sort of wanders around in these locations. He walks a lot, and he gets friendly with his neighbors. And they let him, he wants to depict the whole family, but he always depicts one person at a time. And they give him free reign of his house, of their house. The family that this particular painting's home came from was called the Kerner family. And they had a place on the coast. And he says he was wandering around the third floor of their house in their attic, and it was a really hot day. And he opened the window to cool off a little bit. And these old ratty curtains were over this attic window, and they blew back. And that's what that momentary impression is what became the starting point for this painting. You'll notice it's a very simple painting in some ways. Most of his paintings are quite simple in composition. He like many American artists, admired the work of Ed Hopper, who's another American realist painter. Think of the Nighthawks by Ed Hopper. Most of you have probably seen that painting. Again, these big dramatic diagonals. A Renaissance painter would probably never, ever come up with a composition like this. Yes, this is a traditional subject matter, but it's presented to us in a very contemporary kind of high drama way. Again, notice the very soft coloration. These paintings are not meant to sort of knock you in the face. You're supposed to kind of slowly come up to them and look at them and think about them. Can we see the next one, please? And notice they're not large, by the way. If you doubt my comment that he's a modern artist, look at this composition. Look at the dramatic difference between that ragged, irregular black look of the dead crows and the simple vertical boards of the surface they're hanging on.
They almost look like shadows.
I'm sorry, what?
They almost look like shadows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they do look like shadows. And again, high drama. He really thinks about, it's like stagecraft. How do you've got a subject that interests you. How do you get other people interested in that? So how do you arrange it so that it becomes memorable when they look at it? When you think about crows, your first image is not this ragged look of these dead animals hanging on a barn wall. So there's a kind of memorability in Wyeth's work that mostly related to his staging of the subject. Can we see the next one, please? He doesn't do many portraits. The ones he does are of his neighbors, and almost always they're singular. They're not together. You never see a happy family portrait by Wyeth. You see individuals. This particular individual, Helga, she was a German immigrant and was a caregiver in the Kerner farm family. And again, remember, they let him wander around their place and get to know everyone and so on. He ended up doing 247 paintings and studies of Helga. He must have spent a huge amount of time over at the corner farm. And his wife never knew a thing about it. And by the way, his wife, he wouldn't have had the stellar career that he had were it not for his wife. She was his agent. She was the one that set up his first show in New York City. He was not very practical about exhibiting the work and selling and so on, commissions and things like that. She did all of that. And he spent who knows how long fooling around with Helga. I say fooling around, we don't know exactly. She was married, by the way. This is her, again done in that dry coloration with the tempera medium. Typically, his sitters don't look at us. And so you begin to wonder, what is she thinking about? Who is she? Now, let's look at the last image. This, I think, is a watercolor. It's done in a much looser style than the last painting. This is Helga again. He did some amazing paintings of Helga. Officially, I was supposed to use the term nude, but in fact, the paintings look kind of naked. She doesn't have quite the figure of the standard artist model. They're presented in intimate locations. And so there's a slightly kind of illicit tone about them. They're extremely private paintings. This is the only one we could be able to reproduce. In our periodicals, I saw many of the nude, naked paintings of Helga. And so Jen and I tried to look them up on the computer. This is the only one we could bring up. All the others were blacked out. So I'd love to show you them because they were beautiful, beautiful paintings. But I can't. That's just amazing to me because we talk about the computer full of pornography and so on. a serious artist doing serious paintings, and they're all blacked out. We can't even see them. That's the last work, and so you've got a sense here today of city and country. We've got about 6 minutes left, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions. As I've always said, the best part of the lecture from my viewpoint is the questions people ask me. Yes?
You mentioned that Estes had indicated that getting the tones right was the most difficult part for him. And I'm curious, since he's working from photographs, different types of imagery have different amounts of detail in the darkness and the lightness. So I was wondering, is he trying to get the tone correct as the camera saw or as the eye would have seen?
By the way, that's a very good distinction you just gave. Before I answer your question, I'm going to extrapolate on what you just said. Most of us think what we see is what the camera sees. It's not true. The camera doesn't have a brain. The camera is an optical instrument. It cannot make decisions. It sees everything equally, depending on what kind of lens you're using and so on. So it doesn't focus. It's simply, there's a world, I'm recording it. The human brain naturally pays attention to certain parts of the visual field. A bright color will draw our attention. A dramatic moving shape like a diagonal shape will draw our attention. In fact, what the photorealists are doing is giving us this flattened emotional view that the camera has. It doesn't tell us what's important. In fact, he does edit those images, and of course, he's the guy who's finding the images in the first place. But as far as somehow brightening a particular part of the subject that he wants us to see or darkening it, he's not going to do anything like that. He's, again, as he says, I try not to think about the subject matter. Go figure. I mean, how can you spend this much time doing this much work and not think about what the hell you're painting? It just blows me away. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but he's trying to make us see like a camera sees, which means it's an impersonal. So what I'm trying to do by choosing these two artists today, I picked an artist who relates directly, personally to the subject in an intimate way. That's Wyeth. And then our other friend simply flattens that whole image down to make it totally objective. So a sentiment doesn't quite even seem appropriate. I think that's the strategy. And why did this artist become important and famous beyond his technical skill? Because that way of seeing the world and thinking about the world is a unique modern way of thinking. Wyeth is an old-fashioned artist, even though he was only slightly older than Estes. Estes is a very modern artist emotionally. Yes?
Point one thing out with this one that I find really relevant to life here at Otterbein. Notice the date in which you painted this.
Yes.
2023. He's 93 in this, he was 93 when he painted this.
Yeah,
Or, no,
yeah, that's right.
90, between 90
Yeah.
and 93.
If any of us think we're over the hill, this guy is way further down the hill than we are.
I wonder how long it took him to, like Jenna said, 1993. How long would it take to paint something with that level of detail? Did it
Well, he works 8-10 hours a day. My guess is he probably worked a couple months on this painting. I get that same talk all the time when people look at my wood sculpture. First question they want to ask me, how long did it take you to make that? And I never know. Artists don't think about time. That's just not what we do. We're working on an effect. We're working on an image. We will stay with it no matter how long it takes to finally arrive at what our intentions are. And so that's one of the reasons we're always so poor. We never make much money because we're working at $2 or $3 an hour. You know, I've commented before, I sell a sculpture for a couple $1,000. Someone thinks, wow, holy smoke, that guy is really raking it in. I'm getting about $2.50, $3 an hour for that.
But you have a passion.
Yeah,
Your passion means more.
yeah,
I think some of this is a love letter to New York City, though, because he really does capture the city, and he captures historically the city, like the film booths and
yeah,
different things that and like the Twin Towers were in the one picture. You know, it's capturing the city as in its best light, even.
yeah. Well, if there is an emotion here, it is simply that he in a way, he says he doesn't want to think about subject matter, but the fact that he does all this tells you he loves the city. It's the place that he was able to come out and be himself as a gay male. And that's got to color something about the way he feels about that urban environment.
That the previous one of the city, the one you, that one right there, gives me the impression right in your face. That's the impression that's the impression I get. That is, hey.
That's right, because those perspective lines come together right at us.
Yeah.
If you know linear perspective, that's a focus point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that explanation. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the way he draws us into those paintings emotionally. Even though they're emotionally flat, the composition draws us in. And in that sense, I don't care how realistic you want to label them, they're abstract paintings. They're about composition. They're emotionally abstract.
Do you think he has an obsession for perfection?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he as one of the comments he said in this video, if I get the tonality wrong, I'll do it all over again. So he does a whole painting, doesn't like the looks of it, and does it all over again. That's a typical artist, at least a good artist, a very good artist. Thank you again for coming, folks. I hope I'll see you next week.